Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a truly massive biological wonder today, and that is the ancient, absolutely breathtaking migration of the sublet pronghorn herd out in western Wyoming. We're going to break down a really historic recent decision to protect this route. We'll unearth the deep history behind it, and of course, look at the modern science and policy making it all possible. It's an incredible story of survival, science, and a pretty complex bureaucratic journey. Let's get started.
6,000. We are literally talking about 6,000 years of history at this one very specific narrow bulge of high country that splits the Green and New Fork rivers. You might know it today as Trapper's Point. Thousands of years ago, Native Americans used this exact crossing as a hunting ground for pronghorn. In fact, it's the earliest known killing and processing site for pronghorn in all of North America. So when we talk about this migration route, we aren't just talking about some modern wildlife corridor. We're talking about an ancient, enduring rhythm of the natural world.
200 miles. That is the staggering distance some of these fleet-footed tawny and white pronghorn travel just to escape the harsh winter conditions. They trek all the way south into the lower Green River Basin, which is the semi-arid sagebrush steppe, and then when spring finally arrives, they turn around and retrace those exact same steps. They travel all the way back north, sometimes going as far as Grand Teton National Park just to find lush summer vegetation. It's an absolute phenomenal feat of endurance.
Section 1. Tracking an epic route.
So, for a really long time, biologists in Jackson Hole knew the pronghorn left the valley in the winter, but the exact details of where they went and how they actually got there, well, they were pretty hazy. But that all changed right around the turn of the century. Biologists like Joel Berger, Steve Kane, Hall Sawyer, and Doug Breimeyer started fitting these animals with GPS tracking collars, and over the course of 2 decades, they tracked more than 400 individual pronghorn. By putting all this information together, they managed to build what is now one of the most comprehensive wildlife migration data sets in all of North America.
And you know, this data made it undeniably clear just how vital this route is for the herd's survival. Wyoming Game and Fish Director Angie Bruce actually hit the nail on the head when she said, "Pronghorn are long overdue for recognition. Protecting their ability to migrate is absolutely crucial for sustaining the population. This is especially true during severe winters or extreme droughts, when being able to access different habitats literally means the difference between life and death for the herd."
Section 2. Decades of debate.
Now, actually securing protections for the land they travel across sparked a really complex, nearly 30-year legislative and administrative puzzle. We start back in the late 90s and early 2000s with that initial GPS tracking. Then, in 2008, we saw a major milestone. A Bridger-Teton National Forest Plan amendment established a portion of this path as the nation's first designated wildlife migration corridor. But trying to extend that protection further south into the energy-rich Green River Basin, that met with some significant political pushback. Balancing industrial energy development with vital wildlife conservation is a tough tightrope walk, right? It impacts local economies and the environment. In 2019, state-level efforts to protect those corridors were entirely halted after protests from a coalition of industry trade groups and counties. So the effort kind of gathered dust for a few years, until the data and the push for protection were revived in late 2023 and 2024. And that finally led us to 2026, when final approval of the corridor was officially achieved.
Section 3. The historic designation. Okay, so in June of 2026, Governor Mark Gordon officially designated a massive, more than 2 million acre web of habitat for the sublet pronghorn herd. And a really key part of this designation hinges on a concept called a bottleneck. Basically, a bottleneck classification is meant to prevent surface disturbing activities. It ensures that wildlife can safely pass through critical, narrow geographical points. Trapper's Point, that ancient 6,000-year-old crossing we talked about earlier, is now officially classified as one of 13 critical bottlenecks. Today, it even boasts a dedicated wildlife overpass to help the pronghorn cross safely. But as is often the case with these massive land management policies that have to balance ecology and industry, this final designation was a political compromise. While 8 segments of the route were officially designated as protected migratory habitat, 2 segments were explicitly excluded. Those were the easternmost segments located in the Red Desert and east of Farson. The bureaucratic back and forth here is super interesting. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department originally proposed excluding them, but they were actually overridden by their own commission. Ultimately, though, Governor Gordon stepped in, upended the commission's decision, and chose to exclude those 2 eastern segments from the final protection plan. Section 4. The road ahead. So what does this all mean moving forward?
Well, the sentiment among the folks who worked on this is probably best captured by Rob Slaughter. He's a Sweetwater County resident who actually chaired the working group that vetted the corridor. At the Trappers Point celebration, he said, "Today is not the end of the process, it's the beginning of the next chapter." He really stressed that continued monitoring, research, and adaptive management are going to be absolutely required as conditions on the ground inevitably change over time.
And here's why that continued monitoring is so essential. If we look at the objective realities of Wyoming's current migration policy, it's a framework that relies really heavily on cooperation. It's championed as a voluntary, locally driven conservation effort, and by design, it is actually permissive of development. Plus, private land is completely exempt from these protections, and honestly, the bottleneck designation doesn't offer a foolproof guarantee that new stressors won't be added to the broader landscape as time goes on.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. Will voluntary, locally driven conservation and bottleneck protections be enough to sustain the sublet pronghorn herd as the western landscape continues to rapidly change? It is an incredible milestone for sure. A 150-mile-long migration route with 6,000 years of history is now officially recognized on paper. But the true test of this policy is going to unfold right there on the sagebrush steppe over the years to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.